Last year, just before Thanksgiving, in the city of Kansas City, the homeless had a project. It was called Free Hot Soup KC, and they were feeding people, and the government didn't like it. In fact, they conducted a raid. They burst in on them, a sting operation, and they poured bleach on all the food so that no one could eat it. That's kind of a tragic story. The health department said it was putting people at risk, even though it was professionals providing the food. So let's get this straight. We'd rather have people go hungry than to allow compassion from one human being to another human being. That's a sign of government run amok. It's also the sign of the loss of common sense. We have the privilege of having in the Economic War Room today a friend of mine. I've known her for a number of years. She's a conservative hero, a star. In fact, that's her name, Star Parker. And she is the founder of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. You may know it better as CURE. It's a Washington, D.C. based think tank that really does solve the problems of wealth disparity and poverty and other issues by providing freedom and free market solutions. Star's consulted on welfare reform in the mid-90s. She formed Urban CURE to bring new ideas to policy discussions. In 1996, she was a featured speaker at the Republican National Convention. Now, you may also have seen Star on television because she's been on Fox News and the BBC. She's been all over. She writes a column that is Creators Syndicated, and it reaches 7 million people weekly. She's even co-hosted The View with Barbara Walters. So welcome, Star. It's so good to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you. You had to add that last one, huh? Oh, that was so depressing. One time, that was enough.
You were great, though.
I want penance. I've just, when I get to heaven, I want one little extra star for that one.
You do. You deserve it. You fought the battle on the very front lines.
Woo. Yeah, anyway, thank you for inviting me. I know, this is wonderful, your show. I've just been following it, and now I'm here.
Oh, it's great to have you. The reason that I contacted you for this episode is we just did something on moral democratic capitalism. Moral meaning we've got to do this in a godly way. I mean, you could be a capitalist and you could sell drugs. That's not moral. That's not right. Democratic meaning everyone should have the same opportunity. We shouldn't say capitalism is reserved just for the elite or the cronies, and you talk about that. And capitalism, not socialism. So I want to talk about that. You wrote that article, I think it's Ownership, Not Government Spending Will Shrink the Wealth Gap. I also want to talk about the best way to help the poor, because you talked about what President Trump is doing. I want to talk about our culture and values, because you're very strong on the importance of that. And finally, we'll wrap up. When you saw the Democrat debate recently, you had comments on all of the candidates and their solutions for climate change. So those are the topics. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready for it.
Okay. The first one is ownership, not government spending, will shrink the wealth gap. Tell us about that.
Well, when you think about capitalism, which you mentioned, the virtues of capitalism, and you're absolutely right, you have to couple them with the principles of Christianity, or what we would call Judeo-Christian ethic, which our founders knew that without that it would fall apart. You can't self-govern if you don't understand,
no question,
personal responsibility and the roles of each of our lives. But in capitalism and in its virtues, there's freedom for all. If you know, the beauty of our country, what makes us so exceptional with our 3 C's, with our Christianity and our capitalism and our Constitution, is that anyone from any ethnicity, any background, any brokenness, any type of situation can excel in our country if they make proper choices in their lives. So when you think about shrinking the wealth gap, it's one of the ways that we shrink the wealth gap is by diminishing the role of government, allowing for people to tap into their virtues, into their gifts and talents, and then to put them on a table in a free society.
Yeah, and I think that's the important point. There is a real wealth gap. It exists. There's a difference between black households in America and white households. There's a difference between what part of the country that you're from. There's a difference based on the education that you've had. Capitalism should be equal opportunity. It should not be equal outcome.
Right.
So Tell us about the wealth gap.
Well, okay, let's look at the wealth gap then, because it is real. You're absolutely right. When you talk about net worth, for instance, in a white household, what we're seeing in the median is $170,000. In the black households, you're seeing 17,000, so it's only a tenth. But I also look at glass as half full as opposed to half empty. When you think about the virtues of capitalism, allowing for that equality that you're talking about, we are there. The difference in the black community and white community now is the black community came out of a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and then a welfare state, so you have to catch up. It's kind of like I was talking to one of my friends, if you learned the piano from 3 years old, of course you're going to be more skilled than if you started 30 years old. But if you learn how to play the piano, both of you can be successful in that. So what we want is equality in our society to where anybody from any background can put their talents on the table. And you don't have that with government. When government interjects itself, which has actually hurt the black community in shrinking that wealth gap, because when it interjects itself, it controls. And when it controls your economic destiny, you don't fare well.
Wow. Well, you pointed out in your article that we have spent something like $20 trillion since the 1960s fighting the war on poverty.
That's right.
Has the wealth gap shrunk during that period?
No, actually it's not, and it's so tragic. We are still spending, in fact, $900 billion a year in these anti-poverty programs. Anti-poverty spending in our federal government is a quarter of the budget, and the challenge for us in that now some are estimated $22 trillion that we've spent in this war on poverty is we have not moved the poverty percentage. In fact, it's still about 25% of our population. Different people, but same percentage. But what we did do is we destroyed family life, because when government began to do this welfare state, it had to set means test rules. Well, what are the rules to welfare? Don't work, don't save, don't get married. And they've kept people enslaved to government dependency. I lived in it. 7 years I was in and out of the welfare state, 3.5 years consistently. I know firsthand that their rules are don't work, don't save, don't get married. And we will continue to keep Uncle Sam right there making decisions for you. Decisions on what? Decisions on where you educate your children, decisions on where you live, decisions on even your food. I mean, even through the food stamp program. So it hinders people from being able to put their talent on the table and actually break the cycle of poverty.
It stifles liberty, it stifles freedom, personal responsibility.
Everything. It steals away dignity all the way. There's just no way that we can make any excuses for what has happened. And in addition to spending this, the tragedy is that when you don't marry, you now have really hurt yourself, because this is how you can break free, is if the husband is married to the mother of the children, we don't see the gaps that we see when they're single living. And because the government came in the 60s, we started seeing marriage collapse, in particular in the black community. Other communities are catching up, but marriage totally collapsed. It is so underappreciated that in the 70s, black marriage rates were close to 70%. Today, they're 30%. This is what happens when you have government replace a husband in the home with the children.
And the second order effects of what happens to the children, sociologically, without having the two-parent household.
Data is the bookshelves are just sagging with the data. It's just no question the economic aspirations of the child, the educational aspirations. We see a high crime rate. We see high promiscuity in homes where there's just not that leadership and that continuity of traditional family and or religion. And so it's really challenged us as a society to where now we have pockets of poverty. We have 8,700 zip codes that the Trump administration has determined are economic war zones that we need to go in and fix. He's doing it through what he calls an opportunity zone initiative. But it is something that we can no longer ignore, that the difference is how you have your family formated. When I think about and look at the data on the black family, for instance, comparing to white, a lot of people want to do the comparisons. When you compare homes where you have white husband married to the mother of the children, black husband married to the mother of the children, we cannot even measure the economic differences, the educational differences, the crime differences. Is so small. It's when we have brokenness that we see that gap.
Well, and you have a solution. The solution isn't that you hand more welfare. The solution is you hand opportunity for ownership. You talked about that in your article. What difference does ownership make?
Well, it's like what Senator Phil Gramm used to say when he was doing welfare reform. He said, I've never seen a man wash a rented car. You don't watch a rented car, you watch your car. And so ownership is the key to freedom. And when you own it, you're responsible by it. And so what I believe and what CURE is trying to get into law is personal retirement accounts. We want money to follow people to IRAs instead of going to the IRS. Because whether you're married or single, if you have ownership, you're going to take care and you're going to be more responsible with your choices, which will include then to marry before you produce children.
You talked about Social Security, which is not an ownership. You don't own your Social Security. You get paid. It's a dependency in a sense. But you talk about the difference that would make if we would just take a small percentage of our Social Security and make it available for actual investment in the stock market.
That's
where
right.
you'd own something.
And I'm not the only one saying that now either. Much data is showing, and many people are now articulating. In fact, Steve Moore and Jeff Yass have come up with an idea of ownership to where it's an initiative to where you can just take that payroll tax and instead of sending it to IRS, put it into an IRA.
Which would make a huge difference. I think the statistics on there that it would actually allow individuals, if they started young, to become millionaires.
Oh, yeah.
And they can be a millionaire independent from Social Security,
That's
as
right.
opposed to most of the people that retire now are dependent on Social
That's
Security, which means they're dependent on the government.
Oh, it's always been a Ponzi scheme. Everyone knew it was. In fact, the Supreme Court has ruled twice. It's only a tax. You don't own it. You can't transfer it to your heirs, and you get a lousy rate of return. Yeah, if you took that same money 40 years ago and put it in a personal account, today you'd be very wealthy. That same money that you now give it to the government, yeah, they expect you to come and ask them. And in fact, they demand that at 65 you come and get your entitlements, they call them. And the challenge for us as a country is the entitlement pyramid scheme has turned upside down. Fewer Americans have produced children, and as a result, the pyramid is upside down. So the system is going really broke really fast. And this is going to fall on the backs of not just our young, but disproportionately those that are poor, those that are having trouble already making their ends meet.
And it's vastly increased our government debt. The latest long-term Congressional Budget Office debt projects over the next 30 years, federal debt held by the public will grow from 78% of gross domestic product to 144% by 2049. That was in your article also.
Right. You can't. We're not going to be able to tax ourselves out of this one. We have to look at where the real drain on our budget is. And right now our budget is what, 4.5 trillion? Well, they only bring in about 3.5 trillion. So we're running debt every year. And the more the baby boomers age and live longer, the worse the situation gets. But there's just little political will in Washington to change this dynamic. Hopefully, under the Trump administration, if it is has a second term, that we can get to this really big elephant in the room.
And you've had the opportunity to work personally with President Trump.
With his administration, I'm not personally working with them, but they've done some incredible initiatives on urban affairs, and we are really happy about the relationship that we have, that we can actually go in and fulfill what has been promised through a lot of Republican administrations to fix what's broken down, to focus on that weakest link amongst us. And this president, when he ran for office, he said he wanted to fix the inner cities, and he promised and he wants to do it, and so he's welcomed many voices, not just mine, to say, what do you think we should do? So we're very pleased with some of the progress there.
And one of your friends, Dr. Carson, is heading up the Housing and Urban Development.
Yes, he is.
And he's doing a great job.
He's got some good ideas there. It's interesting to work on bureaucracy, but if you can move the needle toward freedom any bit, I'm not going to be really mad at anybody, even though I want them out of the business totally. I want the block granting to the states. I really don't believe that all of these anti-poverty programs should be in Washington, D.C. They're also, under the Trump administration, making some tremendous changes over at Fannie and Freddie to make sure that all Americans are free. Right now, Fannie and Freddie hold 90% of America's housing mortgages. This is not good.
That's crazy, isn't it?
It's very crazy.
They hold most of the student debt.
Yes.
In other words, we're working for the company store, in a sense.
Yes. And one day the chickens do come home to roost.
Yeah, I have a quote. Socialism does not solve the problems of unequal prosperity. It makes it possible to share poverty equitably. And that should never be the goal.
No, that should not be the goal at all.
So how do we help the poor? You wrote this other article, Trump using American capitalism to help the poor. You mentioned that he's opening up these zip codes that he's focusing on. What else is he doing?
Well, one thing we do know is that when people have a little bit of money in their pockets and they can breathe, they make better choices over their lives. And this is what we want our low-wage workers and our government dependent to start doing, being able to at least breathe. So they're making significant changes on how we do welfare business. Instead of paying people not to work, not to marry, and not to save any money, we're beginning to see a lot more flexibility for people to be more mobile with their choices. Because once you get that little money and you start making better decisions, you have the opportunity to then think differently about your children and live beyond just today and live for tomorrow. So the list is very, very long about some of the things that are happening. But one that I would like to point out is in this Opportunity Zone initiative that's been getting a lot of bad ink from the mainstream media and the liberals because it is so successful. What they did in the tax bill under the leadership of Senator Tim Scott was made this little provision that if you put capital into some of our more distressed zip codes, you won't have to pay a capital gain tax. And so the investors are starting to look at these zip codes very, very differently. Yes. Instead of going abroad, they're looking into these 8,700 zip codes and saying, what kind of opportunities are there for us to start building? When jobs are right outside of your door, I think that we'll start seeing more health in those neighborhoods.
And well-allocated capital produces growth.
Yes, it does.
And economic growth is essential to solving the poverty problem.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Kevin. You know what's unique about what President Trump has done with his Opportunity Zone initiative as opposed to ideas we've heard in the past, like with Jack Kemp, where he wanted the economic empowerment zones, or even Barack Obama had an initiative, is this one has no government strings. This is just you as the investor go do it. And so that means it's organic growth, which is really, really good. This isn't the free market.
Investors look for returns.
That's exactly right.
They want to make money.
And this is a good thing. Money is good. Capitalism is good. Profit is good. It's the engine for tomorrow. And people need to understand that so that they can work. Every time people complain to me about, oh, so-and-so's so wealthy and they have a yacht, you know what? Someone's depending on cleaning that yacht so they can send their kids to school.
Yeah, and economic growth, you've got a quote here. Hoover Institution points out that the U.S. economy grew 3.5% annually from 1950 to the year 2000. Since 2000, it's barely choked out 2% per year on average. And the net result of it is the average income in America would have been only $23,000 today if we had grown at 2% during that period. But instead it grew 3.5%, and the average income is $50,000. Yeah. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and it's a good thing because of not just the money in your pocket to spend to keep the economic engine going, but what gets less attention, but is vitally important, is the morale of your people. You know, I travel the world, and one thing that we have, and is exceptional to our country because of the way that it's been designed, is we are a happy and joyful people. It shows up. Now, are there depressed times? Yes, when you have no money. But when there's growth, people are happy. So therefore, they treat their neighbors well. And this is something you want. It's a good thing for people to have economic stability. And even if it's not equal, if we all are exactly the same, making exactly the same thing like they want in socialism and or what some of these contenders for president want, then no one's happy because no one's happy.
And there's no growth if you actually do that. So Reason Foundation did a study, and they said the excessive buildup of regulations has hurt our economy. If we had regulation at the same level we had in 1950, according to Reason Foundation, the same level regulation, so we're not going to get into your business on everything that we do, worry about which straw you use and that sort of thing. Yeah. Our economy would have grown 2 percentage points per year faster, and the average household income, the median household income, would be $330,000 instead of $50,000.
Wow.
Think about what regulation is doing. Wow. So you've talked about the welfare state. Let's talk about the nanny state.
Yeah. Well, it is a nanny state, and I think the question for us is, who does it best, the government or ourselves? Can we self-govern? And I think that was the question that the founders put on the table. Can a society self-govern? If you have principles of faith, that we believe in God and that there is an eternity that will keep you, in the evil at bay. If we have the virtues of capitalism, where anyone can put their talent on the table and lift themselves up, and you have the protections, the rule of law, and the Constitution, can we do this? And I think it's still an open question. Can man self-govern? And there are those in our society who really don't believe so, and they really want a nanny state. They really don't think that, they have no belief that people can actually make good choices for themselves, whether it's drinking out of certain straws or not.
Or soda size.
Or soda size. I mean, it's gotten really crazy now. Or be an armed citizen. ship. I mean, this is something that we are going to debate. I have a new book coming out. It's called Necessary Noise, and it's talking about this Trump administration and how he does inflame the cultural war, but why this is good news for our society, because it's a debate we should have. Are we a people to self-govern, or are we a people that need a nanny state?
Wow. Well, he's making a difference, there's
Yeah,
no
he
question.
is.
I looked at the statistics on black unemployment relative to white. So black unemployment is the lowest level in history.
Right.
But the gap between black and white unemployment has shrunk, hasn't it?
It's shrunk tremendously so, and I think this is good news. And it's going to be hard for others to argue against the stimulation in our economy, and in particular when you look at African Americans, a lot of attention is being placed there because this is one of the ethnic groups that doesn't vote the way it polls. When you think about the voting patterns of, let's say, the Asian population, 29% poll as conservative and 29% vote Republican, and in the Latino community, 28% poll as conservative and 28% vote for Republican. But in the black community, 22% poll as conservative, but only 8% poll as vote for Republican. So that 14 points is what's up for grab, and that's one of the reasons that the Democrats are so adamant to play the race card and try to keep keep attention off of the economy, and the fact that blacks are faring much better under President Trump.
Yeah, and
than they did even under Obama.
They've lost a lot of political power. Whenever you find one party and you say, that's my party forever, no matter what they do, you lose all your political power.
Well, you know what? It's interesting that you would even bring that up, because blacks have never been consistent there either. I mean, it was just more African Americans voted for Nixon the first time he ran than they voted for Kennedy the first time he ran. The Republican Party was a party of African Americans. The Republicans lost them during the Goldwater civil rights era. But so that means that this community could come back to the Republican Party with the right set of circumstances, and we're seeing some of those circumstances with the appointments on the court, because the black community, black church community is very, very concerned about some of these social issues, in particular abortion and how they've been targeted there, but also on economic issues, to finally have enough breathing room to think about where you're going to send your child to school and or whether you can afford to buy a house.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the cultural and social issues, because you wrote another piece, Our Changing Values Should Worry Us.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's interesting. The polling is a little depressing almost, that and it's probably because of these government-controlled schools that they've been teaching this worldview to our youth, that patriotism is not a good idea, religion is not a good idea, and building big families is not a good idea. So new studies are showing that the whole generation has bought that idea. And so we're seeing less patriotism, we're seeing less religion, and we're seeing less marriage and then producing children. And in fact, we should be very concerned about the generation under the millennial that are just saying they're not going to produce children.
If you think about that, so I don't believe in my country more than myself. That's patriotism.
Right.
I don't believe in my fellow man more than myself. That would be religion.
Right.
And I don't believe enough in my own family and my kids than myself. It's very selfish.
Yeah,
what we're doing is indoctrinating people with selfishness, which is, I believe, socialism.
Well,
Socialism indoctrinates you in selfishness, but in the end, everybody ends up worse off, not better.
Well, they end up worse off, because while they're saying it's all about you, but you have to be a collectivist doing that. So now we have to all buy into the same ideas and agendas. And in fact, I did a column recently about what's happening with the corporate America now wanting to be social engines instead of thinking about their stockholders. They want to think about stakeholders and their profits. So this is a challenge. It'd be one thing if you just want to be, secular and selfish on your own. But when you start involving all other Americans, this is something that we have to debate, because the public square and laws do matter. And I think that if you build a society to where there's this disdain toward children, you're not going to fare well even in a socialist society, because children are how you produce more taxes to take care of these youth. And where we should be very concerned, in particular with the baby boomers and this new attitude of the people under the baby boomers, is their baby boomers are living longer, and these guys down below are buying this idea of euthanasia. They don't want to spend. They know that the money's not going to be there, and the next thing you know, they have assisted suicide and assisted help to make sure that we're not bleeding off of the state.
That's frightening.
Yeah, it is, but it's already happening. There are several states that have already passed laws to assist suicide, and the idea is in our universities, and so it gets worse over time. The more youth that buy into this idea that you can't be an armed society, nor can you be a society that that takes care of yourself because you don't have a family anymore. When you think about that aging population and the demands on healthcare, and the healthcare now is going to be a socialistic one size fits all. This is not a good place that America
You do get to the
needs
death
to go.
panels. That's where you end up.
Isn't
You end
that
up with
something?
the death panel.
And they pretended that that wasn't what they were saying, and it was absolutely true. And now we're almost there.
Well, we've seen some progress with President Trump, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
But you also watched the Democrat debate recently. What were your takeaways from the climate change debate on CNN with the Democrats?
They're convincing us here again that we're all to be suspicious of one another, and we should be sharing. And they think that the climate is the number one problem in society and in the world, and therefore they don't want us to make goods and services anymore, have choices. So they were all the same when it came to no one's getting straws, no one's getting hamburgers, no one's getting. But you know what? I'm very hopeful because the American people are hearing this. I am so thankful that we no longer have to be dependent on ABC, NBC, CBS to get our news, the New York Times or the Washington Post, the AP controlled news. We now have shows like yours and other ways to get information to Americans, and Americans are hearing it, they're seeing it, and I think that they understand that they don't want to live in that type of society where someone makes choices for them. We don't have any problem going into the grocery store and picking our own products. Thank you.
And that's what brought down the Soviet Union. That was one of the stories when Boris Yeltsin came over and saw our choices.
Yeah.
He said, well, the Soviet Union is going to fail because Americans have choices.
That's right.
And choices are better.
Yeah. It's
But
interesting. I clipped the picture actually under one Putin's last election. It was like, oh no, he won again. It's like, yeah, but if you notice all the youth around him, they all had on Levi jeans. I'm like, there's hope.
There is hope. Yeah. But this is what discourages me. And you put this in your article where Bernie Sanders gave his solution to the climate problem.
Yeah.
What was his solution?
His solution is just all over the map, but he just wants to destroy all of America. He thinks he just disarm them and take control.
And the point that you made was curb population.
Yes,
He wants more abortion.
Well, I don't know how much more abortion you can get than what they already have on the table, that you can have up to time after the baby is born to then decide if you want to kill that child. There's a professor out at Princeton who's been arguing for years that a parent should have up to 2 years to be able to then euthanize their child. Where it leads to and where
2 years.
Oh yeah, he's been arguing it for years, and now we're there. But Bernie Sanders, it's interesting that you would pull that part out of my column, is that where his ideas go is into force. They start forcing abortion the same way they're doing in China. And where people think that this is not possible in the United States, look at the debates that we have every time we have a Supreme Court opening. Look at the intensity of Planned Parenthood wanting to preserve their sacrament to kill someone else. Gates family, and why they spend so much time and so much energy and so much money in Africa trying to convince women not to have all of these children.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
We have to fight them. The best way to solve the problem is to make sure that more people understand freedom and opportunity than buy into the ideas of secular socialism.
And that's what you're doing with CURE.
Yeah,
and
we do.
I want to thank you so much for doing it. It's making a huge difference.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Now, we always try to end with something beautiful. Mm-hmm. And there was another story in one of your columns, and that's the story of Bob Johnson, the
You really do read my
founder
columns.
of Black Entertainment Television.
Yes.
So tell us about Bob Johnson.
Well, he's an interesting character because he built BET, which some think in the social culture war is part of the problem. But when you think about him aging and now as a billionaire thinking about ideas, he's a capitalist, and he really believes that there's a future in people. In ownership. There's a future in ownership. We actually saw him on the commission for Social Security reform when Bush was president. So I think that more will listen to Bob Johnson, as I pointed out in my column, or let's hope that more will listen to him than listen to what they're saying on CNN about black progress and where they should go in the next election.
Bob Johnson, he started with a very small amount of money, mm-hmm. and he built the Black Entertainment Television, BET. Right. He's a great American success story. Star Parker is another great American success story. Hard work, the right principles, believing in God, loving your neighbor, the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, these are all evident in Star's life. And they're evident in the impact that she's having literally around the world. There is a better solution. And we like to bring better solutions to you from the Economic War Room. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.